So again, the purpose of this module is to create objectives. And when we create objectives, we're essentially asking ourselves, if this does this, then I expect this outcome. And that's important because not only does that define our price expectations and allow us to get involved in our entries and being on the right side of either new trends or current existing ones, but it also helps us define when our price expectations are not met and now the opposite is happening. Very, very important concept, as I think a lot of new and struggling traders that we mentor typically have issues reacting to what price is telling us, right? And that comes from defining our objectives that we have and what price is and should be doing. So if we take a look at this chart, the first obvious thing that should stand out at you is this double top. Now, if we zoom out slightly, we find here that we have a major 15-minute high right there, right? I'm actually going to zoom in to make this a little bit clearer because it's a little bit important to determine exactly whereabouts that high is. Now, we left this liquidity up here. Our objective in this bullish movement, and it was a bullish movement, was to take that high. That's our first objective, right? But we had an internal double top that did not take that objective, right? So that double top here, our first concern is, can it make a valid high in this movement? And you might look at this as a range, and that's true. But we're looking at this body closure underneath this candle here, which closed above this one, as a major sign of strength and a potential double top forming. We then traded sideways, and we then created an SNDR here that broke this internal bullish movement. And that's important because right here, we've confirmed the attempt to rally, which got stuffed, right? So now we've confirmed failure, and our expectation of this is that this low is now weak. And sure enough, we took that almost immediately. Now, when we look at this movement and we're determining our objectives, we've now had our double top, we've now completed this objective, and we're looking at this prior zone, which we've now reached into. If we cannot break structure, and by structure, I mean you're looking at your intermediate time frame, not your 1 minute, your intermediate time frame structure of this swing here. We cannot break that, and we see that pretty handily on the 15-minute time frame here. And that's very important because now we're looking at this movement potentially just retracing back into our prior zone, right? Which very well could have been in the objective here. So now we're suggesting if it's just retracing back into that zone and we get a confirmed reversal and we see this pattern, this signature in price where we have an SNDR, right? Clear manipulation leg. We then break above it here, right? Clearly broken above it. Now our objective is, from a short term, we're going to trade back down to the area that was responsible for breaking this SNDR. And you probably have already spotted it traded back into that zone there, which broke above this high. Okay? So now if we respect this, we've now got a confirmed reversal in our hands where we've broken order flow and now we're heading higher. This objective in a bullish trend should be to break that high, right? This is not part of structure on our intermediate time frame. So this low, in theory, could break the high, which we see that it did later on. But how do we follow price from here and use our expectations of what should happen on our lower time frames in order to facilitate that movement, right? We've got multiple objectives here. We've got the initial SNDR, which was broken. We're now trading back in to mitigate this area, and we saw a significant price movement. You also might have noticed that we failed to make a valid high inside of there, right? Now we made valid highs in this movement, which is creating internal structure that we can risk off of. But the objective here should be, number one, you've got the midpoint of your lower time frame zone, which is this here. right? So we traded into that. We saw a little bit of a retracement back down to here, right? This isn't being a swing, but this is an area of significant price movement, right? So we trade back in there. We see that we've cleared out some liquidity and we continue higher. This low, after we got a body closure above this here, this low now became protected, and that's important, right? Because now, should we trade lower, and we're always speculating in terms of objectives of the market. If it wants to trade lower, we should break structure. Failure to do that, right, means that price is continuing higher, right, to at least the next objective. So we traded lower. We obviously traded up, right, creating a protected low internally. Our next objective is what? It's the S&DR that broke this bullish trend. The market made a major decision here to send price lower. Major decision. And you see that we returned back up to here, right there. Now, major considerations that occur in here when you're looking at objectives and narrative is that we don't necessarily know. We can speculate, and we're leaning very heavily bullish because of bullish structure and the reversal pattern that happened here, right? We've now got internal bullish structure, but we see a major movement away from this area of interest, right? Now, when we see, for the same reason that we had this internal double top and then ran this low, we're now got failure here, right? Sending us higher, okay? We see this intermediate time frame failure that occurred here. And now our expectation of what happened here is that we now run this high. And by extension, we should not only run the 15-minute intermediate high here, right? Because we're still technically inside of this swing here that we're now looking at running that high. And by extension, we now have this 15-minute movement, right? This swing that formed. We then traded back in, mitigated it. This low should put in that new high, and we've now built an S&DR right underneath what? Our higher time frame high. And you'll notice that that became a major objective now, because the purpose of an S&DR right underneath a low, depending on the time frame that we're in, and this was an intermediate range, was to break this high, okay? This lethargic movement down, again, we're looking at what exactly is going on here, and we see lower time frame structure forming, right? Lethargic movement, not higher time frame, and we see that change in order flow, failure to break below now, and this eventually runs this high here, right? So you've got your objective of, we've got order flow failing to go higher, which means we're trading lower. You'll notice that actually traded lower to the S&DR here that broke this intermediate time frame high. Failure to go lower here. What do we see? Sweep and fail of this low. And then you see internal sweeps here, which run this high, right? Trades back down. Where? To our internal structure. This became an internal swing. We left, protected low internally. Traded back down. Found strength. We're seeing multiple attempts to sell off here, generating failure, which is then sending us higher, eventually breaking that high. So we're looking at objectives in terms of what price is attempting to do and succeeding at or failing to do, right? These rallies are successful because they're breaking highs and closing above, breaking highs, closing above, achieving these objectives, which is how price moves, and the movements down are of a retracement nature. And we know that because they're trading back into prior zones, and we're not able to have any body closures underneath these protected lows here. Okay? So again, looking at what price is attempting to do, it tried breaking the structure here and it failed. And this movement up tried making a valid high here internally, failed. Tried making a valid high internally here, failed. Tried making a valid high internally here, failed, failed, failed. And this entire movement up, we have a speculation that if we built a range here, and if our structure remains bullish, then we're going to continue and break our intermediate and higher time frame highs until we break structure. If we don't break structure, then that theory remains intact and valid, right? And all we're seeing are these attempts to break structure, or at the very least create a valid high in here. And if we can't even create a valid high, that is monster bullish order flow. Monster, right? So our idea that we need to have a break of structure which facilitates higher objectives, right? Or lower objectives in a bullish trend. We need that break of structure in order to really throw our thesis out the window and then have to react to what's going on. This failed to break structure on an intermediate time frame, higher prices. We failed here, higher prices, right? We didn't fail anywhere in here, right? We did fail here, which led to this low and lower prices, right? So we have to react accordingly to what price is telling us.